The Tony Hawk series is one of the most iconic in all of gaming. Since its original release, the series instantly became a huge success, selling hundreds of thousands of copies and setting the bar for arcade-style skateboarding games and extreme sports games as a whole. But by the mid-2000s, the landscape had become oversaturated with games, including yearly main releases of Tony Hawk games, as well as spin-offs thrown into the mix, leading to diminishing returns and the dwindling quality of each subsequent game released, which of course was and still is the standard Activision business model. Now, when you think about the bad Tony Hawk games, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Is it Pro Skater 5 with its awful art style and broken gameplay? Or how about Ride, with the barely functional skateboard peripheral it came with? Well, I hate to tell you, but neither of those are actually the worst game in the series. You see, Ride and Shred aren't the only Tony Hawk games that messed around with the concept of motion controls, nor are they even the first attempt. Really, the first attempt was with Downhill Jam on the Wii, which acted more like a racing game than a traditional objective-based skateboarding game. But hidden in the library of Nintendo's handheld offering lies something far, far worse. Today, my friends, we are going to take a look at Tony Hawk's Motion for the Nintendo DS. Released in November of 2008, Tony Hawk's Motion flopped its way onto the DS in the US and Europe and was seemingly forgotten about immediately after. The game is unique as it is the only game that supports the use of the included Motion Pack peripheral, which is a small GBA-sized cartridge that you plug into the bottom of the DS. The cartridge is required to play the game, meaning you either need an original or light model DS to be able to play it. Oh, and just to be thorough, I checked the game in a 3DS and it does not recognize the built-in gyro as a motion pack, and the motion pack does not register in a GBA, not that it should be expected to. Huge shout out to my friend Gavin, who owns a DS capture card and helped me out with capturing the footage for this video. I'll leave a link to his channel as a card here, as well as down in the description below, where he's currently using the capture card for a Let's Play of The World Ends With You. The game was developed by Create Studios, who mostly made licensed games in the 2000s and may or may not be defunct now, or maybe they still exist, buried in the Activision conglomerate somewhere. It's honestly hard to find any concrete info about the studio and its fate online, as their website isn't even really functional anymore. They also made such iconic games like Brad's Super Babies, Aqua Teen Hunger Force Zombie Ninja Pro-Am, and American Choppers 2 Full Throttle. Tony Hawk's Motion may honestly be their most notable game, and for reasons that I'll be getting into shortly, that's not really a good thing. First things first, let's talk about presentation for a minute. This game is really, really ugly. And I'm not only referring to the in-game models, but even the menus and character portraits look awful. For example, take a look at this portrait of Tony himself. To quote my friend Harold, who said this while we were getting footage, "You look like somebody made a wax sculpture of Tony Hawk and then melted it." A pretty fitting description, I have to say. The menus tried to go for this cartoony style that just doesn't hit how they wanted to. And honestly, there's so little here that it was pretty wasted effort anyway. But we'll get to that a bit later. And in regards to your character model, it doesn't get much better there. You play as your own custom skater, and there's options to customize your outfit and board and all, and you can do it for both skating and snowboarding, more on that later. But the game is so low resolution that your model barely reflects the brands that are supposed to be showcased, such as this Vans shirt that just looks like a bunch of pixels randomly dropped onto the texture. And it doesn't look much better while you're playing either. The game has an inherent flaw where the in-game camera is fixed way too close to your character, making it hard to see where your character is even going and what your objectives are on each stage. The bottom screen usually has a map in an attempt to alleviate some of the issues with this, but it really doesn't help much, and some events don't give you a map at all. Aside from how it looks, there is one major issue, and that is how the game sounds. And I don't mean the sound effects, they're perfectly fine, but the music is very much not. Tony Hawk games are known for their iconic soundtracks of licensed music, generally filled with pop punk, hard rock, and hip hop bangers, from the original Pro Skater all the way through to the newest remakes. But for Motion, I guess they didn't want to spare any expenses for actual recognizable music, so instead they just made some generic lo-fi hip hop sounding beats to play in the background. It's not bad per se, but the tracks are painfully generic sounding. And when you're so used to skating to the sounds of Bad Religion and the Ramones in these games, it really does stick out. They must have thought no one would have cared as it's a spin-off on the DS, but even Underground 2 on the GBA had bit-crushed versions of licensed tracks. Hell, even Pro Skater 5 had licensed music featured, and it's well documented how poorly handled development of that game was. But enough about how it sounds, how does it play? Well, as you might expect, the game is incredibly jank most of the time. It can be said that on a technical level, the motion pack does work to an extent, but it is incredibly finicky to actually have it turn the way you want it to. Sometimes you'll start a mission and the motion pack will think you're holding the DS to the left or right and just fling your character to the side randomly. Other times, it barely reads your inputs at all and you need to exaggerate your movements to get them to register. In order to do this, you end up flailing your DS all over the place, which is a problem considering that you need to watch the screens on the DS to actually, play the game. At the best of times, the game is hard to follow. At its worst, it is legitimately headache-inducing. I don't recommend playing this game for long sessions because you will feel it. I should mention that the game actually has two separate control schemes you can choose from. It defaults to the motion pack controls, which are super simplified and unsatisfying to use, where it just kinda does stuff on its own. I highly recommend switching to the classic control scheme, which uses the motion controls to turn, but you can still press the buttons to do your grabs and flips and grinds, which is the control scheme that I used while getting footage for this video. There's also special move buttons on the bottom screen, since you can't actually use your D-pad inputs in order to do your specials, but it can be a little awkward to activate them at times. Also a problem is the fact that none of them are labeled, so you don't immediately know what move you're about to use until you press it. And as far as I can tell, there's no way to customize those moves, unless I just completely missed it in a menu somewhere, which is completely possible. The game is broken up into two gameplay styles, skateboarding and snowboarding, because clearly everybody knows that Tony Hawk is a legend in the snowboarding world. Well, the snowboarding levels are actually hosted by Todd who is someone I have personally never heard of, but at least it's someone who is a professional snowboarder. There's only 4 levels in the game, 2 for each sport, which are set in different locations around the world. The skating levels take place in Dubai and Tokyo, while the snowboarding levels are in Zermatt, Switzerland, and Burlington, which I think refers to a place in Vermont. Each level is broken up into different challenges, with only about 5 challenges per stage, plus a free ride option to just explore the level freely. The level designs are decent, but they're not particularly expansive or interesting to explore. The bulk of the game is the challenges, most of which you can finish in only a few minutes time, leaving the game feeling particularly shallow and devoid of content for the most part. But hey, they felt the need to tack on those ridiculous anime speed effects to the snowboarding gameplay, in case you felt like doing this. What I'm going to do now is detail just a few of the challenges this game has to offer, and really just mention how flawed they are, especially when you consider the control scheme that the game has to offer. You've got a few of the basics, such as time attack, where you have to get to the bottom of a slope as fast as you can, as well as score attack, which is just trying to rack up as many points as possible in the time allotted. Doing time attack on Zermatt really highlights how broken the physics can be at high speeds, where sometimes your character will just start wildly spinning instead of landing on the ground, like so. On the Burlington map, I played a mode called Super Pipe, which is basically the same as Score Session, except you're confined to a half pipe and you have to cross the finish line before time runs out to qualify. Also at Burlington, there's a mode called Slalom, I think is how you pronounce it, which is basically a checkpoint race, which is a pain to do with these controls. Similar to that, there's a challenge called Messenger on the Tokyo map, which involves making deliveries by skating through specific gates on the map. I didn't realize at first that the gates were the goal, so I just ended up skating around for a while before I finally realized. I was expecting an NPC or something to interact with, but I guess I was expecting too much. There's also a challenge called Hawkman, in which the goal is to skate around and collect as many of the green dots as possible, all while dodging the red dots on the map. It gives you a pretty specific path to follow, but wrestling with the controls long enough to follow that path is easier said than done. But by far, the worst challenge in the game that I played was one called Railhopper, which I played on the Tokyo map. The goal of this challenge is to grind as far as you can down the path of rails, jumping from rail to rail. This is where the issue with the game randomly throwing you to the side at the start really started to screw me over. The first time I booted this challenge, the game repeatedly threw me sideways at kickoff, so I'd immediately fly off the tiny platform that it spawns you on. You get 5 tries per run, and I wasted all 5 of them, so I get no points at all. I went ahead and tried another couple of times after this, and I still wasn't able to get very far. The grinding is so finicky that I wasn't able to get it to connect half of the time, despite my board clearly being at the right spot at the right time. And this is on a skating level, which controls much better than the snowboarding does. I can't imagine what this mode is like on Zermatt, where it's also featured, but I didn't try it out for myself. Also featured as part of this package is a bonus game called Hue Pixel Painter, which is accessed as a separate option on the main menu. Instead of a skateboarding game, Hue is more of a puzzle platformer, seemingly made as a tech demo to test out the motion pack's functionality. The sad fact of the matter is that this little game is better than the actual Tony Hawk release that it's bundled with. You control a small sentient ball of paint who's out to restore color to the world via motion controls, while avoiding the enemies known as drabs from putting an end to Hue and their quest for color. You control Hue almost the same as you would a marble in a box, rolling around to get your character from spot to spot. You also have the ability to jump, which could be used as a ground pound to slam down and activate paint fountains that spew forth out of the ground, as well as using it as an attack against the drabs. The main goal is to lead trails of paint from the fountains to different points in a circle around specific objects in the environment to activate them, restoring color to them and the surrounding area. It's a simple concept, but it's very focused and showcases the actual strengths of the motion pack, something the main game is very bad at doing. I only got a few levels in and I imagine that it gets old over time, but it is a decent little distraction from the lack of enjoyment that can be found in the main game. I wish I had more to say about this game, but there honestly isn't a whole lot of content present to stay interested in this for more than an hour or so of your time, and what is on offer isn't particularly compelling to begin with. If the motion controls worked better, it may be easier to recommend checking this out, but the idea was a half-baked cash grab, much like many of the later Tony Hawk games coming out around the same time. Hue Pixel Painter is a neat little package, and I feel like if it was released as a standalone product and fleshed out a bit more, it could have been something noteworthy in its own right, but as it stands, it's a throwaway bonus playable tech demo on a forgotten motion-controlled disaster of a skateboarding game. The game is normally dirt cheap, so it's not too difficult to track down a copy if you do want to check it out for yourself. But honestly, even compared to the rest of the Tony Hawk games on the DS, this game is weak. It may be best left buried in the DS's back catalog to be forgotten. Hey, thank you so much for checking out this video. If you liked it, please share it with your friends, hit the like button, subscribe, do all that fun YouTube algorithm stuff. I want to thank my friend Dusten for helping me out with editing this video. It's the first time I've let anybody else edit one of my videos for me, so I really do appreciate it. If you like this, please check out some of my other videos which are currently linked on the screen, and I'll see you all in the next one.